So with Shadow of the Erdtree wrapping up, I have been thinking about FromSoftware's next projects and what I would like to see from them. And every time I ponder on this, I always go back to the idea of wanting another take on the open world formula. I know that some people are somewhat burnt out with open world Souls, but I for one really like FromSoftware's take on their open world, and I would like to see them do it again. I think that Elden Ring's open world was really fantastic for a first trial, but I think it has some issues that I would like to see addressed. Some of those issues are things that you've heard before: the reuse, balance, not going to certain areas and steamrolling them because you over-leveled, but I won't be talking about that in this video. I think that we've all heard that before, so I'm not going to go in depth about that. And what I have here are a few ideas that I would like to see for FromSoftware's next open world. These ideas are by no means perfect, and they would have to refine some of my thoughts if they were to take them into consideration. Okay, so the first thing that FromSoftware needs to get a hold of is managing their empty areas and using them strategically. It's quite obvious that FromSoftware has a desire to make empty areas in their open world. Mountaintops of the Giants isn't the only offender here. We have Cerulean Coast and Charo's Hidden Grave in the DLC. The lead up to Bale was also really empty, but I think they did that the best out of all of their empty sections of their open world. And I do enjoy Cerulean Coast, and I somewhat got some enjoyment out of Charo's Hidden Grave, but I think those two are just too familiar, too similar. Most of us did explore Cerulean Coast before Charo's Hidden Grave, and I don't think Charo's Hidden Grave evolved enough from what Cerulean Coast was trying to do. And so if FromSoftware does do this open world again with emptier sections, I think strategically placing the empty areas can be a good thing. Having an empty area, especially near the end game, will evoke certain feelings that you may have not felt before. You know, getting to the end game, you had many hard-fought battles, and reflecting on your experience can be part of the experience of the open world. Now, some may argue that Mountaintops is the empty section of the open world, and you're somewhat right. Mountaintops is empty, but it's not successful in evoking any feelings besides wanting to get the fuck out of there. And the easiest feeling an open world can convey is letting you take your foot off the gas pedal and explore peacefully and just enjoy the soothing environments. If this area was placed right before the final boss, you can get your confidence up before everything goes toppling down. I've been a real believer in the emptier sections of the open world, and I really don't think FromSoftware has done that great of a job with those sections of the map. The biggest critique for Shadow of the Erdtree was how the southern section was pretty barren and there wasn't much to do. And I think they're right. If anything, not having it all backloaded towards the southern section of the map could have relieved some of those complaints. Although I think the lead up to Bale was done the best. Bale does not have any voice lines or a cutscene, he kind of just spawns in like Renala. But the lead up to him of skipping the dragons or seeing the dragons fight for territory or even fighting the dragons is part of the experience for me. I got a lot of enjoyment leading up to Bale. In fact, on my second playthrough, I skipped all the dragons and I had a more enjoyable time because I was the knight going to kill the big dragon. I thought it was really enjoyable. So FromSoftware does do this open world style again. I think they almost have the formula down for an empty section of the open world that could work. Alright, let's move on from that topic and talk about open world bosses. Now, there aren't many open world bosses that are really that memorable, for me at least. In fact, I think I remember the Tree Sentinel the most, as most of us got our asses kicked by him when we initially started the game and left the first step. He was a really good teacher at telling you that you can come back to him later because he was so over-leveled for a base level character. He was extremely hard. And after that boss, I don't remember many of the other open world bosses. Of course, there are the dragons and the Dark Souls 1 boss, but for the most part, they all kind of mesh together in my brain. And that statement alone is a real shame because we have an open world game that doesn't have many open world bosses that are really good. I think a cool solution to this could have been an open world boss that forced you to chase them to their boss arena. Almost like how you had to defeat Midir twice in the Ring City DLC for Dark Souls 3. Defeating him the first time was really just a build-up for his real boss fight. And imagine having a boss in Elden Ring where they are initially on horseback and you damage their horse enough to the point where the horse forcefully bucks them off and then the fight can really begin. Having scenarios like that will make Torrent feel like more of an asset than a simple move speed mod. Torrent was always one of the bigger complaints with Elden Ring and how he didn't have enough to do in the game itself. Sometimes you felt like you should have been able to use him in certain boss fights and you simply couldn't. This was complained about a lot during the Elden Beast boss fight, and FromSoftware finally updated that 2 years later. I complained about Torrent a lot when I talked about Commander Gaius on my main Elden Ring video, and he just felt so underpowered to Gaius's mount that it was more annoying than fun to fight Gaius. So at the absolute bare minimum in regards to Torrent, I think we can all agree that Souls combat is close to a perfected state with ground-based combat, but horseback combat has a lot of improvement that can be made, and I think that if From Software chooses to do another open world, evolving the horse to feel as useful as the player would be their next logical step. So my last talking point here is to not fall into the open world sin, and focus more on quality because open world games have enough quantity in the first place. At one point in time in your Elden Ring journey, you were probably starting to get tired. Most of us were starting to feel that at mountaintops, but it was most likely happening to you regardless. And why I think that happened is because Elden Ring is such a long game that trugging through all that content can get tiring, whether that be because you have too many catacombs, the rewards aren't enough, or you just ran into a point where you had your fill with Elden Ring. I was starting to have my fill near the endgame, of course, but I was also not getting any new rewards that I thought were interesting. I was getting spells as my melee only guy, and in the DLC they give you a ton of cookbooks that most of us probably didn't even touch. I'm one of those people that only crafted the large exploding pots in the DLC, and I didn't craft any new cookbook items. But I also understand that I may be an anomaly because I only do a melee only guy with no spells. So finding exactly what I need for my build is pretty straightforward. But even with these complaints, I still think From Software's open world was really well done, especially for their first attempt. And some of you may be tired of open world Souls, but I think I have another one in me, and I want to see it again.